Welcome to Aggie Pride, a UC Davis football podcast, the show where we break down the biggest moments in Aggie football history and keep you updated on everything happening around the program today. Before we dive into this episode, do us a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, which we are now on. Wherever you get your show, leave a review if you're loving the content. It helps more Aggie fans find the show, and don't forget to share this episode with your crew, your teammates, your alumni, your buddy who bleeds blue and gold. You can also follow us on the socials for clips and updates. We dropped a post this week that we are working on some hat designs. And if you're a subscriber, you'll get early access to episodes and invites to our live stream recordings like the one we did this week. So thanks for joining, and let's get into it. Tonight, we're both fired up because Dwight is here with me to welcome two guys who I would say have become must-follows for anyone who loves FCS football. We got Zach McKinnell and Timothy Rosario, the voices behind the Bluebloods. Zach and Timothy, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you guys having us, man. Anytime we can hop on other shows, man, promote what we're doing on top of just talking some FCS football, man. I think we both appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, and just echo the appreciation that Brock shared, and Aggie Pride podcast followers. It's good to be back. I've been away taking care of some family stuff, but excited to jump back on for this episode, and excited to get to know these awesome dudes and for you all to get to know them. Timothy and Zach, you know, if you've caught any of our episodes in the past, when we talk to folks, we love to get into the X's and O's, and we have plenty of that where we want to get your takes and your wisdom. But we also like to ground in folks' stories and how their lives have been impacted and shaped by football. And so want to give you both the floor to kind of talk about, you know, that weave. You know, where did the bug or the love for the game of football start for you both, and how has that led us up to, you know, you having this platform that, as Brock shared, is really I would say a flag bearer for media related to FCS football. So I'll give you both the floor. You can rock, paper, scissors on who wants to go first, just to talk a little bit about your personal journey with the game of football.
Go ahead, Timothy.
All right. Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, like a lot of kids out there, started when I was young. My dad loved football. We always had it on ever since I can remember. You know, all the pictures of me as a little kid, I got a little football in my hands, you know, all that stuff. I think I started playing when I was 6 or 7, started in Pop Warner. And that was just my thing. And my dad, always was, on the coaching staff, when I was a kid during youth football. I always loved it. I was never the most athletic person, didn't have all those athletic gifts. So in order to stay on the field, I needed to be able to use my mind. So that just led to me, you know, I had to know all the plays. I had to know all the rules. I had to be a step ahead mentally to stay on the field with those guys. So that led to just loving to understand the game, understand the X's and O's, that kind of a thing. But yeah, played all through youth, then played in high school. Got to be on some pretty good high school football teams, competed in some state championship games, and really just loved it. I mean, I love that you guys want to spend time talking about that, because I think we shouldn't lose sight of, like, this is why we all get into it, right? Like, not only because we love the game, but, you know, you love the brotherhood, you love the relationships that have been made. I mean, so many my friends now, you know, come from either past teammates or you know, people that you've met. And then getting out of high school, you know, went off to college. My dad started coaching my little brother, so I helped coach on his youth football team a couple years. And then even though I wasn't playing, just still wanted to be around the game. So I started coaching at a couple different local high schools here in Reno, bounced around for a little bit, coached varsity for a couple of years, and then had some little kids come around, started building the family, and that was a little vexing on my wife to be out all the time at practice during the week and every Friday night. So I had to let go of that, and I was just sitting around one day, wishing that I could still be a part of the football conversation somehow. Still wanted to break things down and look at games. So I had been listening to Zach for a while, probably a little over a year. So just reached out and wanted to see if he'd let me keep talking about football. And here I am now.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to kind of build off of Timothy, same thing. In Alabama, it's just so different. We don't have any professional teams, so you grow up. College football is our professional league. Like, and you hear the Alabama Auburn stories. So obviously, grew up an Auburn fan, but also on top of that too, I was a really big Jacksonville State fan growing up, and so that was kind of my entryway into the FCS, right? Especially as I was kind of getting into high school and stuff, Jacksonville State got really good and started making those runs to the national title and competing at a really, really high level. And that kind of grew my love for FCS football and kind of my knowledge base there. But like Tim said, I was just kind of like the sports nerd. Like I was the kid that you guys remember the old newspapers where, there wasn't really the internet and you had to like wait for the newspaper to come out and you go through all the stats and standings. And I also think too, it's a different love for the game when you come up through the high school ranks, especially when you coach and are around high school football. And I think that's where you see a lot of people that they don't really get to experience that, like to really love football. And I ask people like, are you a true football fan? And they say they don't like high school football. Then I'm like, probably not really a true football fan because you have to watch high school football. Like that's where like the grassroots
praise
come
God,
up.
Zach. There you go, man. Preach.
But for me, I was actually I played offensive line my whole life, played a little bit of D line, but I got to like my senior year, and guys, I was playing left tackle, and I was about 6'1", 250, and I was starting 7A high school football. We were the second biggest high school in the state of Alabama behind Hoover, so I could hold my own. But talking to recruiters, it was like, yeah, man, like you got like NAIA, JUCO, like, and I was just like, I don't. That's not where I really wanted to be, really, AP student. So decided to kind of give that up, go into more of the sports media side, and just looking at it like at that time, the job market was really tough. Ended up majoring in something completely different. Well, I was actually on track to get a neuroscience degree and like with a PhD, and I was at Kansas State in a PhD program for neuroscience. COVID hit, research shuts down, and it happened to be my first year in grad school. My old high school teammate, who plays center, me and him started a college football podcast, and he wasn't an FCS guy. He's a big LSU guy, lives in Baton Rouge now. And so we started off the podcast covering just P4 football, and that's where the Bluebloods started. Well, he got out right about the time COVID hit because he got married, and like Timothy said, when you have a kid, things change, your priorities change. He really didn't want to be in sports media. He had his degree, had a job, and everything. So once I kind of got sole possession of the podcast, I was a big FCS guy. It gave me an opportunity to kind of shift the podcast toward FCS, and not only that, it was the spring season. So I got to cover that last season with Brandon before he stepped away. Well, then I just got to step in and start more covering during the spring season. Then on top of that too, Dion comes into the FCS as well. Popularity explodes. It kind of was a springboard for our podcast going into the fall. And at that time, it was just me. And since that point, we just like exploded with growth. I got my guy, Coach Fred, that does it with me on YouTube, assistant head coach at Alcorn State. I think it's one of the coolest things that we have an active assistant head coach that comes on all the time during the season to talk football. It gives a way different perspective than like Timothy said. I just going through my email, he reached out to me, wanted to write for the site, and me, it just his timing's impeccable because of right about the time he reached out to me, we wrote for the Bluebloods, had an independent site for a while, and then the opportunity came about that on SI, at that time it was Fan Nation, reached out. They didn't have an FCS site. They came across our independent site and wanted to have some FCS coverage just because the national guys at SI aren't going to cover FCS football. And we had the knowledge base, we had the fans that they could bring along. And so we partnered with them. And it ended up becoming on SI. We rebranded to FCS Football Central, and me and Timothy started to do the Bluebloods together, and asked him if he wanted to jump on some podcasts. I thought the chemistry was great. I thought our shows were even better because of the perspective he brought as a former high school coach and things like that. And he loves the FCS just as much as everybody. So since then, man, it was just anything we can do to grow. And I think the goal for us, and I always say this, and I think everyone in the media space, from Sam Herder to Kevin to Craig, truly believe this. Like, we should cover FCS football like the P4s get covered. And with my background in media, working the P4 beat for a while, I still feel like we have a long way to go there. And I feel like the effort sometimes lacks with some of the media space, where we feel like we can be a little bit lazy and maybe take some time off and not talk about recruiting. Because recruiting doesn't matter, but those kids who are committing to these schools deserve to be talked about. Transfer portals kind of changed that. I think you see a little bit more hype coming in, but we should be striving to have as many individual team previews, as much recruiting news, as much breakdown during the week as we can. As that's what me and Timothy have strived to do. We have his Behind the Numbers series, which is twice a week, where he really goes behind the numbers and talks about success rate and what really happened in the game. In case you couldn't watch, we have recaps, previews, 2 episodes a week. And I think I was talking to Timothy, from February till now, I think we've probably produced more content in that span from then to July than some of the other FCS media produces during the season. And so I think for me, that's a big feather in our cap, and I want the FCS fans to become a year-round thing where they have something or somewhere to go to get their content.
Yeah, I'm just over here doing a slow clap for y'all, man. That was amazing. Timothy and Zach, appreciate that lead in, and just shouting out the family dynamic in the midst of all of this. Brock and I are both parents. We both coached at the high school level a bit, and it's a juggle. And so kudos to you both for figuring out how to work well together to have that type of content rate. And it is awesome because there's always something out there for me or for listeners out there to check out. And so it's awesome to hear both of y'all's stories of how the game got you and how you're still kind of engaged in bringing more awareness of this great game and the greatness of the FCS to such a broad audience. So appreciate you both sharing that. Brock, I'll toss it over to you here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot for me to unpack. First, when Timothy starts sharing about his Nevada high school football background, and I'm thinking of Sparks High School, and there's a lot of matchups between Bay Area or Sacramento-based high school football programs with Reno-based high school football programs, and so kind of those crossovers are fun.
Yeah.
And been able to track some of the, obviously, the big name programs where, Hollywood kids are transferring from LA to go play. We won't name names of the private schools out there. But then I also, even when I got this hat, this hat should resonate with Zach. It's not who you think it is. And for our Spotify viewers who are checking this out, it's not Hoover High School in Alabama. It looks like it, but it's not. I actually had the privilege of interviewing, when he was the head coach at the time, Josh Niblett, which is a name you probably know. And I felt like I could run through a brick wall after I listened to that guy. If anyone wants to check it out, it's probably buried on YouTube somewhere. I know he's not the head guy there anymore, but Hoover High, obviously the MTV show from back in the day. Zach, you didn't name drop, though. Second biggest 7A school. What was the name of the school?
Hoover. Oh, well, my bad. Hoover was number 1. Baker High School in Mobile was number 2.
Okay, so you went to Baker. Okay, sounds good. And just the connections with Auburn, and I was at the Rose Bowl when they fell to mighty Jameis and the Seminoles. And my wife, who sadly ended up with me after dating an Auburn Tiger and an East Texas girl, we were sitting next to some drunk Florida State students doing the freaking tomahawk all game in Pasadena. And so those are my little anecdotal connections to you guys, but that's the beauty of football, right? Is like there's just so many little ties that connect us to one another. And I think where I want to go with this is just covering high school football, covering FCS football, covering, sometimes you would say, I think FCS is getting out of the niche category. I think it's got a pretty big audience at this point, and yet I'd imagine there's still some difficulties about that. So Timothy, I think I'll start with you, and I'll let Zach think about this one, but what would you feel is like the hardest part about covering FCS football at the national level specifically? And then more of a layup, what's the most rewarding for you?
I think the hardest part about what we do is because, like Zach said, there's just not that level of coverage out there, is that like we cover in depth, I don't know, 8, 9 conferences, like pretty much every conference except for the Pioneer and the NEC. Sorry about that. But it's a real challenge because that's a lot of teams. It's a lot of conferences. Like most media people out there, they're either doing the P4 or they're doing the G5. And it's such a narrow scope, whereas we're trying to tackle something a lot bigger. And I'm the kind of guy that I hate when teams or the game is covered in a way where the people like aren't really paying attention or aren't really watching the games and they're just hopping on, generic storylines. So I feel like I need to do it right, especially as a guy with a coaching background. Like I want to see the game right. So that means that I'm watching a ton of games or like pieces of a ton of games every single week. And, as a guy with a full-time job and something else and 2 little kids and a full other life, that's tough. That means a lot of, like it's midnight and my wife's asleep and I'm cranking out Lamar versus, Nichols or whatever. And not to mention the off season, where, we go through all these rosters. We got so many names in our heads. Like it's unbelievable, probably the amount of like random, stats and names that Zach and I know. It's completely insane. But I'd say, yeah, the most rewarding is that we get to talk to people from all over the country, which I think is really cool. We get to meet all kinds of new people. We get to look at all these different situations. And, the fact that, that people would want to, tune into that and listen to that and hear that, I think is really cool. And like Zach said, I like that we give an opportunity to pretty much, people from literally all around the country, an opportunity to tune in and hear something about their team that, they're ordinarily not really going to find. And I think that we do it well. I think we do a quality job. We put, a power 4 effort into it. And I think that shows.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the hardest part, to kind of build on what Timothy said, is absolutely putting the rosters together, right? Just because if you're covering it from a P4 level, if you're a national writer at the P4, do you know how many beat reporters for every single team and every single conference you can lean on for injury updates, for transfer portal, for suspensions, for this guy retired from football, right? There's so many different sources. Guys, if you Google some of these players' names that we're looking for to find out if they're back, man, good luck. You might pull up a random person's obituary from like 1960. Like there's nothing there. And so I think that's the hardest thing. And I think that's the biggest part about me and Timothy is you got to build your sourcing and try to talk to as many people with boots on the ground and build. I think the most important thing is building relationships with the SIDs and coaches. Because, I mean, there's so many staffs that I can just text right now, whether it's an assistant coach, whether it's the head coach, I could just text and be like, hey, man, I need what's the rundown on this player? Like, what happened? Why did he transfer? Or, why did he retire? Why is he not coming back? I think the biggest thing during the season is injury reports. It's just so up in the air because, like Tim said, we try to cover. We never talk about a game one of us didn't watch on the podcast. Like that's one of the rules. Like if neither one of us got to watch the game, guys, we're not breaking it down. It's just, why would I break down a game I haven't watched? But the problem is when you go into preview the next week, guys, what if we missed, what if we missed Lamar versus Southeastern Louisiana? Well, guys, like if you didn't watch the game, you might not know that Southeastern Louisiana lost their starting corner and 2 safeties because nobody tweeted about it.
Yeah.
And unless you go through the game notes and God forbid those may or may not be updated. It's like a 40-50% chance at best for those. So it's just staying on top of the rosters was by far the hardest part. I think for the most rewarding, I think what you said, I just, for me, it's the fact, one, I think that on one hand, it's the coaches that we talk to because, we do our coaching series every year and we also do media days. It's so cool to talk to the head coaches. It's like, man, we listen to y'all during the season and we really appreciate what y'all do. And y'all are, my go-to podcast. And it's like, man, for a head coach who you aren't going to question his ball knowledge, right? Like you've got to know football to be a head coach at the Division I level. Like for them to say, I can tell you guys know what you're talking about, extremely validating, right? And it shows that we're on the right path in terms of the content we're creating. The other one is players' parents. Like I'm in Mobile, Alabama, and my mom's a closing agent, and she did a closing for a house in Mobile, and the kid's parent, there was a parent of a kid who played for Southeastern Louisiana. He was a freshman defensive lineman. He was like, man, what's your last name? And she told him, and he was like, man, I listened to the Bluebloods because my son's at Southeastern Louisiana. It's like for stuff like that to happen because we see the numbers, right? We know how many listens our podcasts get. We know how many article page views we get. But still in my head, it's like, okay, did my dad go and click on that,
Yeah.
however many thousands of times? But really and truly, like people are seeing our content, people are subscribing, people are bookmarking our website, whatever it may be. I think the most rewarding part is just running into people out in public and them expressing their appreciation and for them to say like we're their go-to source. And I think for me, every time I hear that, it's like an injection of more adrenaline. Like we got to get better. Like, because we might be, because I have so much respect and I collaborate with so many people in the space, right? Like I've done stuff with Kevin, I do stuff with Sam. I'm a co-host on his show. I co-write or guest write on Craig's website for FCS Stats Perform. I do all of them, but I still kind of look at them as competition in the same light. Not in any way like I hope they do bad, but if Sam's doing however many page views a month or listens a month, like man, me and Timothy need to be there or better. And hopefully all like a high tide raises all boats, but at the same time we should be pushing each other to be on the cutting edge of improving. And so I think that just every time I hear like, man, y'all do a great job, it's just another shot of adrenaline. Like, okay, well, we're doing good right now, Timothy, but what can we do next year or next week to further elevate it? And maybe if there's another coach out there who doesn't listen, how can we get him on board?
Really, really fascinating stuff. One of the things that I was thinking of asking you was about how do you continue during the grind? And you kind of answered it with what you articulated in terms of the happiness impact that you're able to make on people across the country. And, we feel that in a bit part as well in our neck of the woods, and people run into you and you're like, well, oh, wow, you listen to every minute of every show. And then the other thing that stood out with the grind, and I think it kind of is motivating for me in a variety of ways, is the competitiveness, a healthy competition that you have not only with yourself but with others. And I know I remember listening to the National Championship Week podcast with you and Sam, and just kind of getting to hear the ins and outs of being in Dallas for the last year for a little bit here. And just kind of getting to appreciate those little like personal anecdotal nuggets. I think that's why we even said before we click play on this, we're not just about like the X's and O's. We can do that too. People want story. People want stories about people. And even stories about the people who cover the people playing is fascinating to us. And so appreciate you guys sharing that. I'm going to throw it to Dwight, who's going to start getting into some of the on the field action, but great to hear you guys' stories. And again, like we appreciate all of those late night YouTube highlights and huddle films that you're getting access to, because it's not a plenty in this area, and we want to hear it and see it from you guys as much as possible.
Yeah, ditto that, Brock. Zach, I'll start with you, and then we, of course, got to get to Coach Timothy on this. But, Zach, you talked about the relationship with coaches and how meaningful it is, both from getting intel for the pod and for your platform, but also the validation. as you have been, obviously thinking about last year, a lot of coaching changes have happened. As you've been monitoring things over the off season, is there a coach in the FCS who you think deserves more national attention? And that can be, about results, but really, curious to hear your take on beyond the results, thinking about leadership, building a winning culture. Is there a name that comes to mind for you, Zach?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy, and it's kind of cheating to y'all's question, so apologize for taking the shortcut here. But I think because of the lack of coverage for HBCU football, because they don't play in the FCS playoffs, I definitely think TC Taylor deserves way more credit than like he actually gets. And you have the ignorant fan side because you see the comments anytime Jackson State does something. It's like, oh, because of Prime, the Prime effect, the Dion effect. But I've been around Jackson a long time, and I have a lot of relationships on that team and that staff. And also, my co-host is an assistant coach in that conference, whose defensive coordinator at Jackson came up under Coach Fred at Alcorn. So I know a lot of the behind the scenes. I don't think people realize how big of a rebuild it was when Dion left Jackson and how many players had to be replaced. And then TC, talking about it on some interviews, talks about after that Celebration Bowl loss when Dion left, that last year with Shador and they lost in North Carolina Central, that him and Otis Ridley, who's the GM of Jackson State, they got on the bus and it was just them. All the other coaches were gone. Over half the team was gone. And you're looking, we got to find 70 plus players. We got to replace this entire staff. Year one, they go 7-4, guys, have only really one game out of going to the SWAC championship. And then the next year, they come back last year, undefeated in the SWAC, wins the first Celebration Bowl in school history, finishes 12-2, only losses to ULM and an upset loss on the road against a tough Grambling team. But you come into this year, heavy favorites, and they have a chance to be one of the first, outside of A&T, who's now in the CAA, one of the first HBCUs to win back-to-back Celebration Bowls. And what he's building there and how he's been recruiting and everything he's had to overcome, and the fact that he's also an alum of the school, was one of the all-time leaders in receiving yards from Jackson State. I think the whole story gets kind of overlooked just because of the fact that the SWAC doesn't participate in the playoffs. If you had a coach that was 19-6 with an HBCU national championship in any other conference, guys, he would be mentioned with the top coaches all the time. And me and Timothy had our coaching rankings. I think Timothy had him in the top 5, if I'm not mistaken, and I had him right there too. But if you would ask the average fan and or other FCS media, how many of those are even putting TC Taylor in the top 10? Probably not many. But what he's had to do at Jackson State, I think, is one of the best coaching jobs overall. And on top of that, too, the underfunding of HBCUs, especially in the South, is a whole nother aspect that a lot of people haven't talked about, and that he has to battle that other coaches elsewhere don't have to battle under resourced at under resourced universities.
Yeah, I like where you're going there. I Coaching in the FCS is super interesting, right? I think you get your handful of guys that have been around for a long time, but then you also get a lot of really good coaches that only stick around for a few years, right? Because let's be honest, the payday comes calling, and they're gonna do what's best for their families, and you can't blame them. And that it's a situation to monitor for you guys, right? Like with Coach Plow, who I think is an excellent coach. He's one of my favorite coaches in the country. Um, but there's a lot of situations like that. You look at Mike Jacobs over at Mercer. I mean, after 1 year, he was rumored, to be a finalist for the Bowling Green job. It's just tough. But I like what Zach's going with over there. One that came to mind for me, kind of one that a lot of people probably don't even know his name, but it'd be Tony Reno over at Yale. Um, the Ivy League jobs are really tough. It's the Northeast. It's not exactly a talent-rich area of the country. Plus, it's an Ivy League school where the priority is not football at all. And there's a lot of challenges that come with that, obviously. But he's a guy that's just churned out winning season after winning season for conference titles. There's a lot of really good coaches over in the Ivy League. I'd also mention a handful of coaches in the SoCon. Clay Hendricks at Furman, Kerwin Bell at Western Carolina, Chris Hatcher at Samford. I think it's underrated because their job is a lot more difficult than, say guys in the Montanas or the Dakotas, or even, some of the schools out west here, because they have so many schools around them that they're competing with for players, right? Like, man, dude, you're in, Georgia, Alabama, Carolina, like there are SEC schools and ACC schools in your backyard, like at your front door. And the fact that they're competing with those guys for recruits, but also, in the transfer portal era, like they can send somebody down the road and get offers to your best players in no time. So I think the fact that those guys have been able to continually have success over and over again and have stayed, all those guys have been there at least 5 years. And are in a really tough situation. It's much more difficult than, North Dakota State, where, or like Montana, where literally, all those kids do in that state is want to play for your team. Nobody grows up in Georgia and wants to play for Mercer. Not very many, anyway. I think those are probably the few that they just have, much tougher jobs, and people probably don't realize, exactly what they're doing to grind every day and develop kids and, turn out a winning product.
Yeah, fascinating responses again. And Dwight, kind of get your thoughts on it too. But the two things that stand out to me is each of the coaches you chose, one's from the HBCU, not eligible for FCS playoffs. The other's from the Ivies, wasn't in the past eligible for the FCS playoffs. And we poached a few guys who graduated from the Ivies and are looking to continue getting a great education. So they want to come out to the West Coast and play some D-line and reinforce the beef on the 30 front that we run.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that comes to mind is just a quick plug. You even mentioned Mercer. That week 0 matchup on ESPN not only includes – a quarterfinal from the 2024 playoffs with us and Mercer going against each other. It also includes an HBCU matchup. Southern is going to host North Carolina Central. And so I would raise my hand and say guilty as charged. I would not have thought of the Jackson State head coach as a, top guy who's not getting as much recognition. So all good to hear. And then I will pass it to Dwight with this. We were hacking the ball around at the UC Davis football alumni golf tournament, and Coach Plow has said this in public forums everywhere. I'm raising my kids in Davis, California. Come on out to Davis. It's idyllic. It's beautiful. It's cute. Dwight was raised there. It's got a great farmer's market. It's got a huge campus. You get the great education. You want to raise your kids in Davis. He wants to stay in Davis. He turned down some decent OC jobs so that he could stay, and he's telling anyone who wants to hear it. So people will knock on the door, and we just keep praying that he holds to the conviction of, I'm staying.
Let's keep it moving. So, in this, I'll let hitter's choice on this. So either you can tackle this one, but I've gotten some flavor of this question through listening to some of your preview stuff that you've been putting out. But as you're sitting here right now, things are changing day by day, sometimes even hour by hour when it comes to what's happening in the FCS. But which programs do y'all think are most likely to make what we would want to say is a serious push for national relevance over the next 5 years? And give us some reasoning to your picks there. So maybe one or two from each of you would be interesting to hear.
This is so tough. This is so tough because there's a few programs who I would pick that I don't know if it's going to be here in 5 years. That's the hardest thing, because like Tarleton State would be one, but I would almost bet all my money in my bank account that they're probably not going to be here. I think UC Davis would be one of those picks, but with the move they made this past all season, moving all their sports to the Mountain West, I don't necessarily have 100% faith that they're going to be here in 5 years. Same with Sac State. They'll probably move up. I mean, they hopefully will move up this year, right? If they have any say about it, but maybe. So outside of those three programs, I kind of look. I don't know if they have the resources. Like that's what gives me pause here. But just in terms of on-field performance, I think Incarnate Word's one of the ones I kind of look to as a program that I don't know. They don't have the facilities, right? The stadium seats like us, but when you look at their recruiting, they're recruiting like they want to win a national championship because what they're doing is building layer depth. And it's something like with like you look at the North Dakota State, South Dakota State teams, even go back to those James Madison teams, they had so much layer depth where their second, third, fourth best wide receiver running back would be wide receiver one on like 70% of teams. You look at Incarnate Word this year, guys, they have 4 running backs that started last year at a different university. They have multiple wide receivers that would start anywhere. Quarterback with Richie, no, with Munoz, I don't. Maybe he starts everywhere else, but I think offensive line and defensive line is where I worry with them. And me and Timothy have talked about this. It's the state of Texas, right? They lose their starting tackle to what was it called, TCU last year, and I heard that it was kind of settled by week 7 or 8 probably last year. And they kind of knew. I think the biggest thing though is they had that quarterback pipeline, so transfer portal quarterbacks are going to want to play there, and that's going to be the biggest thing because of what they did with Lindsey Scott, what they've done with Calzada. You got the Cam Ward connection. I really do think Torres though is going to be super interesting in what he develops over the next few years because I don't know how you guys feel, but if he has a big year, he's probably going to get some pretty big offers because the rumored report for Calzada is $2.3 million to Kentucky. So if Calzada got $2 million and Torres has like a Walter Payton level year, which is what he's going to need to have to win a national title, I can't imagine the number that's going to be thrown at him, especially because if I'm not mistaken, Torres has 2 years of eligibility left after this as well. So Incarnate Word's one that I look at, and I'll say this, I think since they're participating in the playoffs with the proper buy-in, don't be surprised if one of these Ivy League teams emerge as the potential next FCS power. I look at Harvard specifically because talking even behind the scenes with their head coach, it seems like there's more people behind the scenes at Harvard than a lot of people think that look back at those national championship runs. And in this age of, the transfer portal NIL, they don't have to battle that. Like, guys, how many kids are transferring out year one at Harvard and giving up the Harvard degree to go play at UMass? None. Do you know how many other FCS schools can recruit the kids Harvard can if they have the academics? None. They'll land any kid they want over any other program if that kid's academically and it qualifies for Harvard. So I think that those Harvard Yales would be my pick, especially if early playoff success comes. I'm telling you, and I know some people are skeptical, if they make a run to the quarters or, God forbid, a semifinal run, whichever school that is, there's going to be some booster that's like, guys, we can go win a national championship. And we have 18 of them. And so I think that's all it's going to take to wake up one of those Ivy League schools. I would toss it to Timothy, though.
Yeah, it's tough. Like Zach said, it's tough because, we don't really know which schools are going to be around. Obviously, I think the biggest thing you want to look for is, just team buy-in, right? Culture buy-in. I think that's been the toughest thing. We've seen obviously, I would say Valley dominance, but really, North Dakota State, South Dakota State dominance over the last, 10 to 15 years. And the problem, a lot of those teams in the South that had that great fan base, right, that had the good facilities, whether that's App State, Georgia Southern, those teams have gone and left. Which is tough. I think what you're looking for is a team who can string together year after year success, and then really, bolster that. We'll have to see. Right now, I don't really see anybody in the SoCon that has that level of buy-in or really the facilities, right? If you're looking for someone to be, a true contender, I do think it starts offensive and defensive line, and it's not just hey, we got a guy drafted. Like there's plenty of teams all over the place that are, especially the HBCUs. I mean, they're getting offensive linemen drafted, defensive linemen drafted. It's about like, hey, do you have like 10 legitimate defensive linemen like that are athletic enough and big enough to go compete in December? And the reality is that just hasn't happened outside of the Dakotas, and that's what's led to that string of dominance, and we haven't seen that happen. I think you're the advantage that the Dakotas, Montana State. We've talked about it a lot, but they're in a little bit more of that isolated place. They can draw to a certain culture that way. Everybody there is into that team, right? They can draw everybody in. I do think that Sac State, UC Davis, they have an opportunity if they were to stay in FCS. I think there's a big enough footprint here. There's enough people in the area. There's enough of a football hole, that you can kind of gravitate towards here. I think if the right culture was put in place and you had the longevity, which, you're talking about, I hope, Coach Plow is there for years and years and years. And I think that it would take something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure where else that kind of comes from. I think we'll see teams pop up here and there. I think Incarnate Word is an interesting one just because they've built so much momentum, with, what that program has been year after year, that they're able to attract talent in every single year. I think what's precarious about that situation is what happens if you have 2 down years. Like, does that kind of fall off the tracks? And do they really have the infrastructure to get it back up again? Maybe they do, but it probably takes a particular, coach and staff and things like that. I think it's tough in some of these other areas of the country. The portal doesn't make it any easier. Now, the thing is, though, all these landscapes are shifting, right? Because what if in 5 years we have more of a contract situation, right? Like where that allows programs to have more stability. It allows programs to be like, okay, we know that when we bring this guy in from high school, he's going to be here 3 years. I think that changes things a little bit. Like, then maybe we can start to have that conversation about some of those Southern teams and even some of those teams in the Northeast. But that is certainly what makes it more complicated.
It'll probably be a cop out, but if you had to pick another program, it's probably South Dakota. As much as everyone kind of throws up in their mouth like hearing another Dakota, but what happens if North Dakota State, South Dakota State do make the jump, right? Because there's a lot of talk about North Dakota State being the first one there. If they finally get that elusive invite, South Dakota's kind of positioned perfectly right now to take that next leap, right? Because they would move up in the pecking order of Dakota schools at the FCS level. So those kids who might not be good enough to go to a North Dakota State, who would be at that point FBS, they would probably pick between South Dakota State, South Dakota. I just don't know if North Dakota has enough momentum right now, and they're more new on the Division I level anyway. So they need some more momentum, but South Dakota's put together some really good seasons. But like Timothy said, it's the consistency, right? And you look across the FCS, there's only been a handful of programs that be able to stack winning seasons on top of each other. And that's been the challenge because you have a good season now. We saw Furman, right, who made that run in the FCS playoffs, push Montana. Guys, they lost like 16 starters the year after that. Whether it was to graduation or the transfer portal, you saw UAlbany make that remarkable run to the semifinals. Guys, Greg Gattuso's at Penn State now, and they lost every single key player from that playoff run to the transfer portal. Like, their quarterback transferred to Miami to sit behind Cam Ward.
Third stringer.
That's what we're talking about. So that's what you're battling, right? You got guys transferring to be third stringers at FBS programs. And so I think that's going to be the toughest thing right now until, like Timothy said, buyouts. And there's been a lot of rumors that buyouts are coming as this landscape shifts. And I think that will be a game changer for FCS programs if it's implemented correctly, right? Because there's probably going to be some loophole that there's only buyouts for P4s and FCS is going to get screwed as always. But if there can be buyouts, that changes the game for FCS programs.
Well, you're leading us. Yeah, go ahead, Timothy.
No, I just throw another one. Northern Arizona could be one. I think that that program hasn't been handled super well over the last handful of years. But if you were to build some momentum, there's a lot of like if you do follow recruiting, there's a lot of talent like being flushed to Arizona with people leaving California. If you just look at across, you see the talent going up there. I think there's a chance for them to grab some more. But I mean, you got to have the right things come together. But I think those are the kind of schools you want to look for.
Well, two things, and then Brock's going to take us to where you both were going, which is like the future of the FCS as you see it. And maybe 5 years was not a fair timeline. I should have said next year, the next 2 years. But the last thing is I thought I was over the pain of Vermilion until Zach brought up South Dakota and all that. All the memories came rushing back to me. So I got to take a beat and go on mute and gather myself here.
Yeah, as Scott Gordon, who is our color analyst for UC Davis football, shared with me on a couple podcasts ago, we were in a missile silo in Vermilion, South Dakota. It was horrific, and we will not say anything more about that day. It was flushed from our memory forever. Yeah, a couple things, and maybe we'll tag team it, or maybe we'll break it out into two questions. Some things that both of you said that stood out. One, the word infrastructure, which we want to get into. Line play on the offensive defensive side, and we were huge last year, especially on the defensive side, and yet we saw deep into the playoffs the lack of depth in that area really did come back to bite us. And 6 interceptions, and Land Larson having to get tightrope surgery on his ankle, those things kind of hurt too. I think of the watered down Bay Area programs that I could throw a rock at from my backyard office right now in Cal and Stanford, and just how miserable it is. I grew up a Cal fan who'd go to games all the time. Now to see those programs, so much so that UC Davis is like outgaining Cal by 150 yards in the first half last year, and we're like, this team is not better than us. This team is not better than us at all. And so I see that as an opportunity for a UC Davis to insert itself, for a Sac State who beat Stanford 2 years ago to insert itself. And so I'll get into the UC Davis infrastructure question in a moment. But before we do, we have one more high-level FCS question, which is really about the next decade. And I feel like that next decade we could see FCS like fall off a cliff and maybe totally be rebranded into something else, Division II or something like that. But we're really interested in each of your thoughts on the changing NCAA structure, of course, NIL and the realignment pressures. Is the FCS going to exist as we know it in 10 years? Zach, we'll start with you.
I mean, I guess I could solve world hunger while we're at it too, if I could see that far in advance.
Please go ahead and do that.
I will say, okay, so as we know it, probably not. But I think me and Sam Herder have both been kind of lockstep on this. I don't think the FCS will ever go away. But now, will maybe it rebrand under another name? Yeah, possibly, but it did that when it went from Division I AA to FCS. Like, we've seen that happen. But I always think there's going to be room for the division in the Division I landscape, right? The subdivision in the Division I landscape. Now, there's two arguments here, and not to be long-winded with this question, but there's just a lot to break down when you talk about this. There's the argument, and I kind of lean this way a little bit, just selfishly, that because I like to see good football, that what you could happen is P4 separates. The top G5 programs that want to compete can go with them. Do your thing in P4, have the college football playoff, and you probably have about 85 teams in that subdivision, right? The bottom of G5 and what's left would merge with the top of FCS, and that would be your second D1 subdivision. And the teams that didn't want to stay D1 or didn't have what it takes to compete would drop to Division II. Because let's just be honest, there's a real need for West Coast teams in Division II right now, by the way. Like, it is scarce with all the programs shutting down and moving, all those good D2 programs moved up or shut down. Like, there's nobody really left outside of a handful of teams. But let's just say that, you have those programs drop up and it's like an injection of talent into Division II. I think that's really and truly, if you want the best high level football and the most competition for a playoff system, that's probably because let's be honest, guys, Kent State's never going to make the college football playoff ever. It's never going to happen. But Kent State probably could make the FCS playoffs.
I don't know about that.
No, when they were good, like when they had like cribs in them back in mid 2010s, they'd probably make they make the FCS playoffs. I don't know if they beat North Dakota State. That's a whole nother conversation. But like ULM is never going to make the college football playoff. But guess what? They were competitive when they were in FCS before they moved up. Louisiana Tech as well. But, the Liberties, the Tulanes, like let those programs go with the P4s. But then on the flip side too, Mississippi Valley State, Utah Tech, whoever you want to throw into this conversation, in Murray State, they are never going to win an FCS national championship. And unless you are going to put up and get the funds to compete, probably should just drop down. Like the Pioneers shouldn't exist. What the NCAA needs to do is get rid of the Dayton rule. And these programs that are just that they just are funding football just to be in the NCAA tournament in basketball need to go away. Like, there's no reason for the Pioneer League to be a Division I conference where they steal a bid to the FCS playoffs. And if you want to be a Division I conference, fund football with scholarships. That's what should happen.
Shots fired.
Yeah, so I think it would be better for the FCS as a whole. But then the other flip side argument, I think this is where Sam Herder lies, and there's a lot of fans, and I get the logic behind this, and it's probably more likely what's going to happen is you have 3 subdivisions in Division I moving forward. What happens is the P4 separates. You have the G5 and the G5 playoff, and the top FCS schools would force their way into G5, and then you would have what is left of FCS. And what would probably happen there is you would take some of the top D2 programs and bring them to FCS. You look at the Ferris States, Grand Valley States, teams like that could compete nationally. Maybe Valdosta, West Florida would also come up as well. So that's what you could do, is you would have 3 subdivisions, and you would still have FCS or whatever you wanted to call it, right? But it would just be the 3rd subdivision, Division I, rather than the 2nd. And so one of those 2 things are probably going to happen, guys. I don't ever see FCS just disappearing, and what we have is P4 and then a G5 with like 230 teams. It's just way too much. And the difference between Tulane and Utah Tech is way too big to have in the same subdivision. Like, those 2 teams shouldn't be competing for the same championship, just like Kent State and Alabama should not be playing for the same championship at the end of the year. So I think you see some sort of restructuring, guys, but I do think FCS as a whole is not going to disappear. It might just be called something different or fit differently in the overall Division I landscape.
Quick follow-up before we get to Timothy. Sac State doing what they're doing, UC Davis potentially doing what we're doing, and some of these other programs that are making that push for maybe a non-P4 FBS conference. 10 seconds on, is that smart? And do they have a chance at actually getting to the P4? Or do you think they're just going to end up getting lumped in with all the same Big Sky teams they were with?
They're definitely not going P4. If that's on the none of those, I don't think Sac State or UC Davis has the funds to compete for the same national title as Alabama. It's unrealistic. But I don't know if you're just going to get grouped with the same FCS schools. An AD told me this, because I was on the side where I was like, you're stupid, right? And Timothy could tell you, I said it was kicking in the door to a house just to wind up in the same room of everybody you were trying to escape from. Like, you just kick the door in for everybody else to sneak in behind you. But an AD told me the goal for like Sac State, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, these programs we've seen move up recently, Delaware, is, yes, maybe we forced our way to move up, right? And we end up in the same place, but at least we were positioned. Just in case it goes another way, we position ourselves to be in that G5 playoff if the second option happens, right? If G5 has their own thing and doesn't combine with FCS, at least we got in before the door was bolted shut. That's the game plan there, is like, let's be prepared for both options, because maybe you do wind up in FCS. But what happens if you hesitated, missed your opportunity, and if you're Delaware, you're stuck in the FCS, and now the door's gone to force your way into the G5 playoff. So it's really just kind of hedging your bets almost at this point. Either you wind up in a better place when the realignment happens, or you're just back where you started. And hey, we go and compete for FCS national championships like we've been doing for the past 30, 40 years.
All right. So a couple things to further complicate this situation. Because I think it's even like, I like a lot of those ideas. But I think what we have to remember is it's going to be a trickle down, whatever it is. Right. And all of these decisions are going to be motivated by money, by TV. And that's going to start with the Big Ten and the SEC, because what complicates this potentially further is like, what if they just decide that they're making their own league and they break away from the NCAA entirely, which is on the table, because then they can get away from some of the rules, and it'll allow them to be a little bit freer to, pay teams and whatever. So, if they break away and take, Clemson, Florida State, Notre Dame, name your favorite Big 12 team, then you have an even bigger, subset underneath that. Cause what do you do with Boston College and Wake Forest and Northwestern and, some of these teams that are in these conferences, in, P4 conferences historically, because they've essentially just got lumped in and been, gotten paid because of teams like Florida State and Clemson and all these teams. So I think that complicates it. I think the complication with the G5 playoff is a G5 playoff would be undoubtedly better for the fans, probably inarguably better for the players as well. The problem is like, are they going to make money from that? Would that make more money than the bowls and the sponsors they get for the bowls? And there's no way it's going to make more money than the chance that the cut that they get from being in the college football playoff. Right. So like, the problem is all these administrators and all these G5 conferences are trying to desperately hold on to the big college football playoff as long as they can, because the cut that they get from that is better. So I don't even know, while most everyone would think, hey, this G5 playoff, hey, 3 subdivisions of D1, that's going to be the most competitive. It's going to make, the best product. It's going to be the most fun for the fans to watch. I don't even know if we can get enough traction to get there. So it all depends on, what happens at the top there and how that gets broken up. I do think we're going to see changes. I do think there's too many, why didn't Sac State get D1 status? It's because already, FBS administrators are feeling like, man, we have way too many teams in the subdivision already. So I do think there's some kind of a split coming. It'll be interesting to see where that is, and then, what the trickle down kind of looks like after that. I do think something has to be done, though. Like, the fact that Cal and Stanford are in the ACC is like, I mean, it's beyond insane. It's completely ridiculous. It's crazy to think that like Sac State was looking to get in the Conference USA. Like, what is that? I do think that eventually gets settled, but it all will stem from, whatever money decisions are made at the top, and whether these G5 conferences are actually, like, truth is, they don't really care about the fans, and they don't really care about their players. They care about how much they can pay their athletic directors, and how much those administrators are making off of all this. So a long story short, it's complicated, and I'm not sure what's going to happen.
The other problem too is with the G5 playoff, which I think there was a little push there for a while to have that from a few G5 schools, but the ultimate problem there is they don't have the power of the P4 conferences to get that separate than the NCAA. And so the problem is going to be is you're literally just going to have the FCS playoffs in G5 form. And the big issue with that is, and I love the FCS playoffs, but there's no money in the FCS playoffs at the end of the day. And because you got to bid to host, the NCAA takes a bunch of the money, which is kind of a scam in the first place. But what's going to happen at the G5 level is they're going to do the same thing. The NCAA is going to put it on. They're going to take gate money from you. You're going to have to bid to host. And so if you're like Missouri State or Delaware, you're like, what are we doing? Like, we're not even one of the top teams in the G5. We just left the FCS where we also weren't making money in the playoffs, and now we don't have a chance to win this playoff? So it's like, what's the overall benefit of that, right? Because what would happen is the G5 playoff will become what the FCS was in the 90s, where you would have those teams winning the championship, where you would have like the App State run in the mid 2000s. You would have the Georgia States or whoever, whoever wins the national title. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing with the G5 playoff is how do you make it make sense outside of the FCS playoff? And if it's the exact same structure, why would you not combine the G5 and FCS to have more teams available for that playoff and have a more competitive field? So there's just all these different factors with the G5 playoff, which I think pushes the idea even further and further back, where maybe you're looking at a 10, 15-year plan rather than this launching in a few seasons.
Well, I need that crystal ball because I mean, you both lay out compelling places that this thing could land, but it really does feel difficult. And that point you made about hedging, I think even if you take the microcosm of what Davis is doing, what Rocco and the administration is at least saying about the plan with football, and then what the folks over at Sac State are doing, it really paints a picture of two different hedges, two different moves related to, hey, where are we going to position ourselves to be successful? And I think, like, of course, we'll continue to track that and continue to tune into, what y'all are picking up and putting down with regard to where this is going. Shifting a little bit to Davis, UC Davis, the Aggies. Curious your perspectives, having tracked the FCS for quite a while now. From the national lens, what do you see as UC Davis's identity in the FCS world? Is it sleeping giant, fringe playoff team? Someone folks should ignore, or something else. What are you seeing as the current identity? And then that might take us, Brock, into your questions about infrastructure and what Davis is currently building.
I mean, I think you guys should be like, the goal for UC Davis should be where, like, they should be where Incarnate Word is right now. And that's kind of the more frustrating thing, because I think UC Davis has way better facilities, a better infrastructure. I think the finances are there. I mean, because me and Timothy kind of know a few people surrounding that UIW program. They're not operating with the same level of funds and support that UC Davis is, right? And I just think you look at UC Davis, I think this is the truth. I don't know if y'all would agree. I feel like UC Davis has underachieved a bit in the FCS landscape over the past few years, where I think individual talent's been there, man. You guys have had some unbelievable individual players, but the team success hasn't followed. Like, I think you look at UC Davis and you should see more quarterfinal appearances. You should see a semifinal run. You should consistently be in the conversation for a top 16 seed. The problem is, I do think y'all got screwed a few years ago. What was that, the year y'all beat Sac State and they let Sac State in anyway? It was
2 years ago.
Yeah, unbelievable. And I was pissed about that, and that should have never happened. And the fact that especially they didn't look at Landlaris's injury. But anyway, I don't want to rehash that right now. But I just think that there's been a few years where, whether it's an injury, right, or a snub by the playoff committee, or a player not living up to the hype, right, that came into the preseason and just didn't perform up to expectations, there always seems to just be like a tripping point for UC Davis, where they're sprinting toward living up to this potential, and then they'll stumble. They'll trip over this, like I said, all these different factors. So I do think last year was a big step in the right direction, and I really do credit the coaching staff for that. And I this is no disrespect to the previous coaching staff, because y'all had some good coaches, but I think Plow's kind of unlocked a little bit of that potential. And I think you feel a different energy coming from UC Davis, and I think there's an expectation, even with all you guys lost defensively, there's still an expectation this year that UC Davis should be a top 10 program this year. Like, if UC, like, for me and Timothy are both voting in the top 25 this year. If me and Timothy can't put UC Davis in the top 20, that's a disappointment with the talent that this team has this year, especially with all the question marks elsewhere, not just in the Big Sky, but nationally. And I just think it's due now, and I don't like to put too much pressure on programs, but there's a time now for UC Davis to capitalize and make this run to the quarterfinal, make a run to a semifinal, compete for nationally for something, because I do think there's been years where UC Davis has been more talented than a Montana. They've been more talented than Sac State, Weber, Northern Arizona, like some of these teams that we've seen make the playoffs and potentially make runs. They just haven't been able to. They haven't had all green lights, right? Like Montana, that like with Clifton McDowell, they just lucked into the fact that Clifton McDowell took over that quarterback battle and just had an unbelievable run there, right? And then there were some other Big Sky programs that disappointed. Seems like when UC Davis has that luck, there's another Big Sky school that gets really really good and trips you guys up on the way on the path there. But in terms of infrastructure support, fan support, this program should be a every single year a yearly playoff contender, and the expectation should be to make a run to the quarterfinal almost every year. And that's just my opinion, looking at it from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I think I'm right there. I think the expectation moving forward, given what the current FCS landscape is, with some of the teams that we've lost in the last few years, and the unique position that we're in, when we were talking about teams that can take that next step up, I think Davis hits a lot of those, boxes. I think you should expect to be a top 10 team every year. Like that should be the expectation. I think you have good recruiting footprint, nice facilities. You got buy-in, good attendance to games, good fan buy-in, and I think if you can keep that culture together, whether that's the coaching staff or keep being able to keep players year after year. You're not a program that's losing a ton of guys to the portal. I think that should be the expectation. And there's enough talent there for sure. I think it's been there. I would almost say really, the last 3 years before this year, this kind of been a little unlucky. Like, even like you had that game where you almost beat South Dakota State, right? That was 2023 or 2022. That was the year they won the first time. I thought they were absolutely. I thought y'all were absolutely a top 12 team in the country. Like, didn't make the playoffs because you slip up here or there. But I think the quality has been there. Last year they kind of finally put together the consistency with the results. But I think you should expect to be, in that conversation every single year, right up there with, I think looking at those programs nationally, it should be the Dakotas, the Montanas, Sac State, UC Davis should all be right there. Which, by the way, is a travesty with what happened the last 2 years at Sac State. The coaching job was just horrendous.
So you remember that game in Eastern, another stab to the heart. But there was talk at that time of like, this is a new era for UC Davis, and I would say even there's been some of that talk with the run that we made this past year. You spoke to it a little bit. Why maybe we haven't lived up to the hype or the potential, the trip ups. And so you spoke to that a little bit, Zach, but maybe just a bit from you, Timothy, as well, of like, as you look at that 2018 playoff run, as you look at, the last couple years, outside of some unlucky situations, obviously you never want to put it on that. You want to put yourself in a position not to leave things up to the football gods in that way, but maybe speak to why you think Davis hadn't been able to fully capitalize on that 2018 moment nationally yet.
I mean, I'd have to, and maybe you guys could give some good perspective on that as for, why exactly. I do think, maybe it feels maybe a little bit different with Coach Plow here, just a little bit of a younger guy, right? A little bit more energy that way. I think football's it's a funny sport. As we know, all guys that have played for a long time, when you play 11, 12 games a year, so much can come down to one or two of those. And, when a couple things don't go your way, all of a sudden, a season which, you make the playoffs and at least go one or two rounds and people are feeling good. And then one or two of those results go the other way. You don't make the playoffs and it's a disappointment. It's a disaster. And you might have had the same quality of team, right? I think the teams that are able to, be, consistent year after year, there's an elevation of the culture, the buy-in, that kind of thing. I look at what Brett Vegan's done at Montana State the last couple of years. That's a great example, right? I think there's just been, I think he brought that expectation from day one. It doesn't matter how many coordinators they lose. The expectation is that they're out there winning all those recruiting battles. They're out there, building out their depth. And so, it doesn't matter if you have a couple of those results go the wrong way, because you've built a program that essentially overwhelms everyone around you. And so I think, just constantly, making sure you're winning those recruiting battles, making sure you're doing everything you can to have the highest standard everywhere around the program. Whether that has to do with development or bringing guys in. Yeah, that would be the biggest thing, and I just think that starts with your head man, and it trickles down from there.
Yeah, Zach, I would take this to you now, and I would just take us to the 2025 and a quick peek. I know we're getting late and want to get you guys off to the rest of your night, but in terms of some of the nuggets out of your preview, you chatted, and Timothy, you mentioned this too, about Sam Golgolski. We had a nice Vermilion depressing dinner with Mr. Golgolski, and we're looking forward to, his next season, because he was a good contributor for us on the edge on limited snaps. But who else and what else, Zach, do you really see moving forward for the team this year? We do know it's going to be Caden Pinnock as the guy. We're going with the young athletic quarterback, and excited about that. High hopes for him. Dual sport athlete, currently played baseball this past spring. But what else kind of comes to mind when you look at the recruiting classes from the last few years, the fact that we don't lose a bunch of dudes, the fact that we have some good incoming transfers on the defensive side of the ball, and that there is no drop in messaging? We are saying, we went to the quarters, we want to go to the title game. We don't care if he's a redshirt freshman. What's your take?
One, I love and I'm not surprised, right? Just because of his track record with quarterbacks. Love the fact that Plow is not afraid to go with the best quarterback in spring, because you see a lot of guys that half step that decision, and they're going to pick the senior, and they would pick Harper, who it's good to have him in the room, right? In case it doesn't work out, you have an experienced guy behind them. But there's a lot of coaches, and in the conference especially, we all know who I'm talking about, that would have picked the senior and then brought him in, mid-season and tried to throw him in. And I just think when you look at Plow's track record developing quarterbacks, you guys know what he can do with an athletic quarterback. I think Miles was a very pocket guy. He had a little bit of, I wouldn't say mobility, maybe like elusiveness in the pocket, but he wasn't running anywhere, right? And I think what it does with such a creative offensive mind, it unlocks so much that he can call in terms of play calling, because we know he likes to be creative. And with Miles, you can move the pocket a little bit, but you were kind of limited in what you could do with his legs. And Plow's going to be able to open the playbook and do so much more with a young athletic guy. And I'm really, really excited to see what that looks like, especially against a good Mercer defense in week 0. It's going to be great to see him go up against a defense that has some guys that can make him uncomfortable. Like Andrew Zock is going to make him uncomfortable in the pocket at least once, right? Maybe he doesn't have a huge game, but he's good enough to make him uncomfortable once. How does he respond in that moment? They got some good secondary pieces that are going to put some pressure on them to make good throws. I think it's going to be great to see them go up against that. I love Samuel at wide receiver with what you guys have coming back. I think he's probably going to be my breakout candidate. You mentioned offensive line is super experienced, which is good when you have a redshirt freshman quarterback, when you know the offensive line in front of them is going to be super experienced, super disciplined. And then also you got the tight end room is so deep. I mean, I would argue probably the deepest tight end room in the country. Just off the top of my head, I can't think of one where you would have three guys who could possibly start at almost any other school in the country, especially Winston, man. Winston has so much athleticism and what he can do just in the offense as a whole. But I think the defensive lineman is where y'all killed it this offseason. Me and Timothy have been really, really high on what you guys did in the transfer portal. Not all transfers are made the same. You can go load up on transfers and they be FBS drop downs. But to get a guy like Darrell Porter, to get a guy like Jacob from Harvard, that's just different, man. These guys are all Ivy League selections last year and played a lot of snaps. And also, too, now Jacob's going to be more of an edge rusher, right? And I don't know if he's going to move inside much, but Darrell Porter can play all along the defensive line. And we've seen that throughout his career at Dartmouth. I'm going to be very curious. He doesn't have necessarily the same size you guys had on the interior last year because you guys were just big and it was hard to move. But I do think that what Darrell brings you guys that y'all might not have had last year is that athleticism on the inside. He's going to be so versatile in how he can get after the passer, generate negative plays. And I think pairing him with Sam, who should take a much bigger role off the edge, you guys have three guys that can go get the quarterback. And I don't think y'all had that last year. Y'all's edge rushers could get to the quarterback at times, maybe, but y'all lacked a true elite pass rusher. You have three guys who potentially could serve in that role, even from the interior, because I think a lot of y'all's interior guys just took up space. And that's great with the scheme you guys run, but you also need someone who can make plays on the interior. And I think in the secondary, we know what Rex is going to be. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on Rex. He's going to be an All-American. And same for Porter at linebacker. But I think the underrated addition, and I talked about him, we talked about him a little bit in the preview, was Ty Richardson from Tufts, not getting enough respect. And me and Timothy try our best, especially on the audio episodes, to highlight some of these guys coming up from D2, D3. Ty Richardson was a baller at Tufts, a consensus D3 All-American, if I'm not mistaken, 6 interceptions last year. He is massive because the secondary really needed some experience. Then you also bring Kalani Riddick from SEMO, who was an all-conference level guy, and Josiah Allen from UTEP is a very interesting addition as well, because a lot of these FBS dropdowns don't play a lot. He played a whole lot at UTEP, and he brings a whole lot of experience to that room. So for you guys to have three guys that played a lot at their previous institution on top of what you're going to get with Rex and then Porter at the middle linebacker spot, I really do think, and me and Timothy have said this on the show, this defense could be better than it was last year, even with all the new pieces, because I feel like y'all upgraded at a handful of key positions along with the development for Porter and Rex.
A lot of confidence, Timothy. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that was a really nice roster breakdown there. I'll just add, I think last year I was big on Davis making a playoff run, getting towards the top of the Big Sky, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that I thought with Tim Plow coming in, that was going to really elevate Miles Hastings to what, he had a couple of tough seasons after really playing well at the beginning of his career. And I think we saw that. And so they've recruited really well at the quarterback spot. I like that they're going with Caden Pinnock. I was listening to your guys' one of the last episodes you did where you talked about it. I like that, we're not gonna go scared here. We're gonna go with the guy that we believe in, that we believe raises our ceiling the highest. I also like that, it's not like a system where all of a sudden you're going to see QB power like a million times. I like that, they'll be able to utilize that, but he's still going to be, a guy that's able to operate the system that they run. I think an underrated part of this is in year 2 now. I think there's a real chance that year 1 you kind of have the guys you have, right? Like, and you're starting to work to build relationships and develop guys, but you're not really seeing any of that development pay off yet. I think there's a chance you see a lot more of that this year, and so while you lose a lot of household names, I think there's a chance that that they actually could even raise their talent. In a handful of areas. You're probably not at running back, almost certainly not. But that's okay. Like, you can fill in the gaps elsewhere. I will say, like, I think the biggest thing for me is offensive line. Can the guys they have get better? I really thought that was the weak point of the team, to be honest. For the talent that they had offensively and for who they had at running back. Which, by the way, I went to the Montana State game last year, which is incredible. It was an incredible scene of people like sprinting to try to get back into the stadium as y'all almost pulled it off. But that catch that landed, like, so that was like right in front of me. My mouth was on the ground. Anyway, the fact that they had him and really kind of struggled at times to run the ball. I just think, like, if you want to be someone who makes another deep playoff run, you're going to have to see improvement there along that offensive line.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting to bring up the O-line because that was, we don't allow sacks. We get rid of the ball quick, though. And the drop-off in the running game was something that, in some ways we expected it just because it is a different scheme that Coach Plow runs. And it is a bit hard to argue at times, even though we know you need to run the ball in the winter when it's snowing up in the Big Sky country. It's hard to argue when you're like a top 10 offense and you win 11 games in your first season as a head coach. Sure. And everyone, Coach Dan Casey's like just retweeting all your creative goal line plays on ESPN against Montana. So it's both, though. It's both. It's like anything. It's just different styles and stuff. But anyways, Dwight, I know that we both probably need to get running, and Zach has definitely got to get some Z's because it's getting late out in Alabama. So I will just wrap this up and say, like, we are so, so grateful. I was on the edge of my seat. I know the listeners will be on the edge of their seat because the nuggets are deep from each one of you. Like, you can tell how much work that you guys are putting into it and how much knowledge that you do have from a lot of different corners of the country. And we don't always get to hear that on our podcast. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to share that perspective and look forward to catching up with you down the road. Not sure if it'll be in Montgomery at the Crampton Bowl, but maybe we make a deep playoff run and we see you in one of these god-awful domes that at least keep us warm.
Yeah, hopefully we get a dome. Remember, Brock, we were in the airport and ran into some Incarnate Word folks who were headed up to Brookings to play outdoors while we were going to the dome. But yeah, I just want to echo Brock's appreciation. You guys are amazing. Zach, you almost stayed with us until the morning hours. So you're the man for that. And Timothy, appreciate your takes as well. Look forward to continuing to follow your breakdowns, and hopefully, as Brock said, we'll get you back on the Aggie Pride pod at some point in the future.
Man, anytime. I think I speak for Timothy when I say, like, if you want either one of us to jump on at any time, man, just reach out. You guys kill it, and I think we need more team-centric podcasts, man, because, I mean, I don't think you guys realize how important y'all are to us and what we do, because you guys are boots on the ground and have just, even more connections than we do at UC Davis. And I think it's better for the FCS fans as a whole, because I think every single week other fans look for fan pods, right? Like if Montana's playing NAU, they're looking for an NAU pod, or vice versa. NAU fans are looking for the Montana pod, and there's like 7 of those just because it's Montana. But we need more of those across the country, and you guys do a heck of a job, and I just appreciate y'all having us on, man, and we really appreciate the support, man, and all the kind words.
Yeah, totally agree. I would love to come on anytime.
All right, thanks, guys. Get some sleep. See ya.
All right, fellas. See ya.
And that does it for this episode of Aggie Pride, a UC Davis football podcast. Again, if you are enjoying the show, take a second to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. It helps more people find the pod. And if this episode stood out to you, feel free to share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For updates, bonus content, and early access to episodes, follow us on social or check the link in the description to subscribe. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Go Ags.